Hello, and welcome back to another show on the future of work and the future of talent. This is actually our second session, and we're going to take a look at the needs of the young versus the needs of the more senior people like CMOs. I think you may know from tuning in before that over the last several months, certainly the future of work and the future of talent have been big topics. What we're doing is we're talking about how they affect each other, and we're doing so with two experts who you've met before. One is Tim Mickleborough of the Global Marketing Exchange, and the other is Bernie Lonis, who has a wonderful consultancy on the future of work. So why don't we just jump in? And let me start with you, Tim. What do you think young people want from work today? And if you don't mind, let's begin with a big picture and then maybe get a little bit more granular.
Okay. Thanks, Deb. Thanks for having me. I think, all right, big picture. I think young people are looking for opportunities to learn and earn. I mean, I think that's very big, very top line. I think the job market for well-qualified candidates and graduates right now is much tighter than it was a year ago. The pandemic has put enough pressure on companies to make that happen. Competition for entry-level marketing jobs is certainly higher. And I think young people need to be better prepared and better equipped than ever to secure those jobs that they want at the organizations that they want to grow at.
Now, is that challenging for them? I realize if they have had some work experience that they might be better equipped to go in with a little bit of a self-starter feeling. But if it's a first job, that must be a bit tricky.
Yeah, I mean, right. That whole cliche about, all I need is experience, and how do I get experience without getting a job? And, those sort of getting that first job is always the toughest. I think the way that they've combated that a lot is through different models of study. You see different models of study across Europe and the States in terms of getting work experience during their studies, whether it's in some models in France where you're working literally in parallel 3 weeks out of 4 in a company, 1 week in a program in university, or others where you have more those opportunities to actually get real-time, real work experience during studies, I think are allowing people to obviously to be a little bit more prepared for that first job when it comes.
Interesting. Well, I would like to go back to that, but I'd also like to talk to Barney now on the other end of the spectrum. What do CMOs want today in terms of interaction with their teams and in terms of the skills that they're seeking from new talent, whether that talent is close to them in an office situation or if it's virtual?
Yeah, I mean, CMOs are definitely in a hot seat. I think they've always been in a hot seat. So, their bosses, they want results. They want them now. They want to be bigger, better than the competition, more creative. I think, the CMO, runs a multifaceted team. It should be digitally and data driven. So it should be functioning in real time with the ability to see what impact your communications are having out in the marketplace, and to be able to sort of use and read that data to drive your intelligence, your understanding of your customers, and what's going on in the marketplace. So I think there's a theme around data, digitally driven sort of insight and communication with the team. I think overall amongst their team, they need a huge breadth of skills as well, because we've got a lot of different channels to work through. And as much as we do rely on data to help us understand what's going on, I think we also rely, and CMOs, are relying on creativity and those things that will differentiate them in the marketplace. So I think one of the challenges for a CMO in the future of work, and especially in a kind of disparate sort of team environment that we're working from at the moment, is how do you have a clear picture of all of what's going on in your diverse marketing team and your organization, and how do you organize those resources? Because, you may be driving some long-term programs, but you're definitely investing a lot of money in the short-term programs. So thinking about the connectivity between that ties together all of your activity with the results is one piece. I think I then just want to come back to this kind of notion of creativity, which I think is a bigger challenge with a separated team. CMOs still want to be able to access the best creative talent, that they can to bring onto their business. But I think it's uncertain yet as to how you can do that if you're not actually all going to be located in the same office space. So I think there are some challenges that we've got to think through there.
Interesting. I think you're right about thinking through those challenges. Tim, I wanted just to go back to you in that you're working with so many trainees who have probably had some real life experience or real in-office experience, and now they're working remotely. What are you hearing from them? I mean, obviously, we think of younger people as far more digitally savvy. And I'm sure that the contributions that they're making certainly matter. But how are they feeling about it? Is it no difference to them? Do they feel that they're lacking a bit in really making their contribution? What are you finding?
I don't think they're necessarily lacking in production or lacking in feeling that they're contributing to campaigns, to work, to projects, that the companies that they're working with. I think they feel quite comfortable in a remote situation. As I said before, I think they're very comfortable with quickly bringing on the tools that the company needs and being proficient at them very quickly. I think what they're missing is, and we touched on this last time, I think it's really about those opportunities to make those in-office business relationships work. And those clearly they are missing those. I think they're quite good at making up for that, but everyone that I've spoken to says, if I had the chance to go back to the office, I'd like to go, and they've all, without a hesitation, basically said, in some shape and form, yes. They'd like to go back. They'd like to rebuild those, and maintain those opportunities to talk, to chat, innovate, as Barney said, be creative, and even just share a few social moments. I think those are all very important things that today they're not getting to do. Do they want to go back and be, sort of a 9 to 5, or call it what you will, day work in the office? No. And I think those days seem to be gone, I think, for almost everybody. So I think ultimately to be able to choose to go and have companies be available for you to go and collaborate and meet up and do those things in an office environment. And Barney will have a great point of view about what that kind of environment would be to be the most efficient and effective. But I think that is something that, if given, when you give them the choice, they would say, we want our cake, we'd like to eat it, and we'd like to have both. We'd like to have flexibility to do both.
No, I think certainly flexibility is a key word. One thing that strikes me is that in the recent research we did on the future of work and the future of talent, it seems that most people are not going to be going back to the office in the foreseeable future. And every time we hear something, we're hearing that the point where people might have been going back to the office keeps getting pushed back farther and farther. One of the things that also came out of that research, which surprised me, was that marketers, who do, I think, tend to be the optimists within the companies, did feel that they were determined to find ways that, despite the obstacles of not having the in-person meetings and that spark of being next to someone, that they were willing to find ways to make sure that people still felt connected. And I was certainly impressed by that. And I'm wondering if as many CMOs want to go back to the office as their younger trainees. I'm not completely sure. So I don't know, do you think that there is some overlap here, that both groups may want some of the same thing?
I mean, I think there's inevitably overlap, right? I think if I think about it from a CMO perspective, you want a thriving team with a great energy to go out and create great work. And, I think of the agency world, which is fueled by young people, and a lot of that energy is just that hunger for knowledge. And why marketing is so fun is because whether you're driven by numbers or driven by creativity, there are ways, there's such a sort of learning opportunity there. I think where I as a CMO might have more concern is that the ability for people to learn when they're sitting side by side each other is just so much richer than a sort of 5-minute on-demand YouTube, Coursera, Khan Academy learning. Even though those 5-minute bite-sized chunk learnings are excellent, but just the being in the presence of, other experts or other generalists and listening to how they tie together a kind of integrated marketing campaign, looking over someone's shoulder at how they're beginning to instrument their websites with complex marketing technology, and, how to do the right pivot tables through Tableau or whatever it is in order to generate the insights to sort of justify your ROI. There are a lot of those kind of observational learnings that I think, the CMO would have an eye on and say, I actually just need people. I know that the only way to drive better performance is to get people physically together. And they, that might put them slightly at odds. Sort of bright young things who go, I don't know, maybe I'll go in on Tuesday if it works for my schedule. And I think, there's a natural disconnect there between managing a team and needing to have the certainty of delivering results, and a slightly more sort of laissez-faire attitude that sort of might think, maybe I will, maybe I won't go in. So I think there's some conflict there. But I think the thing that concerns me most is around that sort of serendipitous learning you get in an environment where you definitely need multi-skilled young marketers who understand search and social, as well as more complex marketing campaigns.
Yes, no, that certainly seems to be an ideal way of making things work. Tim, do you have any further comment on that before I go in another direction?
I don't think so. I think it is, very interesting what Bonnie said. I do think there is, I can see the CMO's point of view. I can see that bringing people together is in a hub to really generally feed off that energy is very, very understandable, very effective. I do think there's also plenty of parts of marketing that actually quite benefit from being isolated some ways. People can build websites by themselves in a dark room sometimes easier than they can in a busy office, right? Mm-hmm. Or analytics can be done in a way that is perhaps where focus is required and things like that. Not always is it loud collaboration and kind of multi-sharing opportunities. I think there's a place for both, and I think you need, offices of the future may be able to have to allow for both. I think the model of being able to do some work with people when you need to is ideal. You just think about sales organizations used to have to be all together so that they could listen to each other on a phone call to make that sort of overheard learning. To Barney's point, I think is absolutely valid, and I think it is the same for marketing, and maybe less on the phone, but more over let me look over your shoulder and tell me what you're doing. And those things are vitally important. So for me, I think it's both, but, I totally understand where you're coming from.
But I think there's one other thing that's worth thinking about is that very often from the CMO's perspective, you want your reliable team that's focused on the numbers, or your reliable team that's focused on social media. And if that little part of your world is working well, you sort of don't want to move those people on, right? But those people may feel as if I want to learn something new, right? The scope of marketing is very big. And I've got a hunger to move on, and I'm being, forced into this little pigeonhole of a definition of what I can do. And I think that is a very interesting kind of paradox, that whilst the marketer wants to have a diverse team, they also want stability and to be able to sort of get the best people working in those best areas. And there's a sort of hesitation to move people on and move people around. And Tim, I think that's one of the areas that I'm always interested in about your business and the structure of how you're moving people through a range of different marketing capabilities so that they are getting a much more sort of rounded learning. And, it strikes me that actually that process of deliberately moving marketers around the team and having a constant pipeline of fresh talent to move into those roles, it's actually a luxury I don't have in my own team. I've got sort of individual skilled people. And if they were to move on, it would be a massive dilemma for me. So having a pipeline of talent to move in, I think is, definitely from a CMO point of view, something that they need.
Right. Understanding that there's someone, that if someone moves on and in the spirit of learning and developing, there's someone behind that to sort of to take it on as seamlessly as possible. And I think living in that sort of managed revolution is very healthy, but at the same time can be quite stressful for CMOs who, just as you say, are looking for those. I want to keep that person in that job for 5 years if I possibly could. That's just not really fair or realistic. For us, we're sort of looking at an 18-month cycle, and we're looking at opportunities to, have people in those 18 months grow and increase their skills. At the same time, at the end of that, either move into a different team and get a different set of skills, or be promoted and stay in that vertical. So, it's an interesting discussion, and I think there's a lot of CMOs that are really coming on board with that once they can kind of get over that fear of movement.
Yeah, I would think that getting your next job or networking in order to do so has to be just hard for anyone of any age and any level of development in times when we're focused on remote work. That said, I was intrigued by one of the comments that we got in our recent study on the future of work and the future of talent. And someone actually commented, this is a time to rethink the business and bring new talent to accelerate the new vision. Now, I'd be curious as how you both interpret that statement. On the one hand, they might mean this is a time to focus on new ways to engage colleagues in meaningful ways, or is it an opportunity to grow a stronger culture and get rid of old-fashioned stereotypes like, oh, that's the way we always did it mentality, or is it something else?
My basic answer to that question is always yes. In that I think it's actually less passive than the question suggests, and I think companies wouldn't it be nice to rethink our business now when we have, I don't know, perhaps the pandemic has allowed them to sort of put gas. I think absolutely not. I think they've become forced to rethink. If they haven't been directly disrupted and affected in a negative way by the pandemic, then companies around them and their competitive set or their suppliers or their supply chain will have certainly been, or their market has certainly been disrupted. So if they're not thinking about it, if they're not planning to innovate and quickly, then I'm not sure what business they're in. But, I think it's been forced rather than a luxury of sitting back, and is absolutely something that they need to get on the front foot for. In terms of creating a culture of innovation, I think that's also a necessity, because those that don't innovate in this kind of current climate are the ones that are going to struggle faster than the ones that are, that do.
Any thoughts on that, Barney?
Yeah, my response, Deb, is to think about it in terms of sort of fluid talent in some ways. I mean, one of the struggles is that you can't continue to build in-house resource. But when you have got a lot of exciting marketing programs going on, you just have to find bodies to bring to the task. Now, sometimes the agency model just doesn't work. They're too sort of fat around the edges and too slow. And I think one of the interesting opportunities that we have now when everyone is remote, but also just emerging, is this notion that you can hire sort of gig posses of teams of highly skilled people who you can point at a key growth program and say, do this for 6 months. And so I think some of those kind of gig-driven platforms that enable you to hire super talented people, sometimes the most talented people, to put onto a project for 3 months, 6 months, whatever it may be, is a great opportunity for marketers. I think whether it's Freelancer or Fiverr or Upwork or whatever it is, some of those platforms are also fabulous for outsourcing great copywriting, simple production skills, simple, image development. So I think when I think about new opportunities as a marketer, I think about it as one of access to new talent. And I think that's particularly exciting. And in some ways, the separation that we've got in quarantine is helping fuel that. So it's helping CMOs think, well, okay, maybe it's not so important. Maybe I can tap into new resources and they don't have to be sort of physically co-located. So I think that's exciting. It's forcing people to overcome prejudices that they might have had in the past, and look at new engagement models for, augmenting team skills from other people.
No, that is quite interesting. Let me just ask, and I'm not sure if either of you have heard much of this, but are you hearing discussions about how the pandemic has changed people's views of their careers, whether they're senior or new to the business?
I mean, Deb, I think let me take it from a young professional's perspective. I think the pandemic clearly has kind of sent a shockwaves through the talent industry, through the talent marketplace. They're still naturally very positive, and I think there's a lot of interest in roles. As I said, there's kind of competition is tougher, but I think they're keen to upskill. I see a lot of people upskilling with technical skills, especially software technical skills, during the pandemic period, in a way to sort of beef up, ready for the next year, when they see companies kind of start to sort of look a little further past the parapet. So, I think there's a lot of positivity, a lot of upskilling going on, and I think that's gonna put people in good positions for their careers, whether they're just starting out or whether they just already kind of starting to sort of gain experience within companies and organizations. I see both of those kind of things happening.
No, that's very interesting, and you're obviously working with an industrious group of young people. If they're spending some of their time doing that, glad to hear it. Barney, what about you? Have you heard of anyone, particularly at the more senior end of the spectrum, changing what they do or thinking through their career now?
Yeah, I think there are definitely big changes. I also think there's a big difference between where you sit in regionally. But from a kind of, peer point of view, the big thing that I see is to commute or not to commute, right? And it's about quality of life. So it is really sort of making more sort of older people really question about that work-life balance in many ways. You know, do I want to be going into the bigger cities for the bigger jobs to ride the bigger career, or do I actually want to do something that's closer to home and, you know, gives me a better work-life balance? I mean, so on the one hand, those are very real questions I'm seeing people question. But there's also a big generational split. I think we've talked about this before, between what young people are feeling, who are young, free and single or together but not yet married, and what they get from a working environment versus what sort of the lives that married people or just older people are living. And it reminds me of, you know, when I worked in China and Hong Kong, the office was really like a home space. Like, people didn't go, oh, I've got to go into the office. People looked at their watches saying, yes, I'm going into the office. It's play space for them. You know, they'd often be living in tighter quarters with their family. So actually going to work was their release, and it was with their friends, and it is release time. And you would pretty much have to kick them out of door late at night because they'd be literally playing games in the office late at night, and that was how they chose to live. So I think it's also just worthwhile thinking, you know, we're all in global businesses, but actually how it impacts different ages of people, but also how it impacts their work-life balance in different regions is pretty significant.
No, you're right, and certainly the number of people at home, and if home can withstand the bandwidth, so to speak, on multiple levels. Well, I think that you've done a magnificent job in not only comparing some of the needs of senior people and young talent, but you've also looked at some of the intersections and some of the differences that you know, may never be resolved. We are in interesting times, and I thank you for being part of this session, but I also look forward to our next one. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Deb.
Thank you.